You know, I didn't think this was possible. I didn't hope this was possible. And they almost had me convinced we were over this phase by now, of people saying, "Oh, this is the worst episode! This is such an animated atrocity," trademark. And I didn't think I'd make a video like this someday, but here we are. It hurts me to say this, but there's a new worst SpongeBob episode. So yesterday I have made a video on already fan favorite episode My Leg, based on the running gag of the same name. In my opinion, this was one of season 11's best episodes. It had some really clever gags, not by any stretch overdone visuals, likable characteristics of our main cast and the supporting characters, and didn't rely on any form of cheap humor like gross out scenes and the such. Sounds good, doesn't it? Now take the complete opposite of everything I have just said, multiply its awfulness by about 10 times and get your foreheads in position, cause this is going to be one cringe-worthy ride. The synopsis of Ink Lemonade goes as follows. Ink Lemonade is a SpongeBob SquarePants episode from season 11. In this episode, Patrick's lemonade stand is unsuccessful until he gets a secret ingredient from Squidward. That doesn't sound too bad. It could be like a modern day bubble stand, couldn't it? I totally understand why that concept would intrigue you. It piqued my interest too. However, after the title card, we are instantly greeted with annoying Patrick screeching "Hooray!" I guess we can scratch off speech impediment on a Patrick stupidity level bingo card. And I swear to God, they have dumped him down endlessly in this episode. Even in other ones of the same season where they went the route of overemphasizing his stupidity levels, he didn't look like a big pink monkey man as he does here. I thought that's what his sister is for anyway. Squidward goes on to rant on about his stupidity because he is the big meanie man that doesn't let Patrick have his fun, but does end up giving him an old trash lemon. What? Did they dumb every character in this episode down? Because, of course, Patrick really does put this in his lemonade, not without even further grossing it out, of course, and ends up poisoning his first customer, which then goes on to barf into Squidward's house, which Squidward is not as unhappy about as I expected him to be honest. SpongeBob, who is suddenly just kinda there, scares Squidward with a megaphone, a gag they have already used 3 times now, I should add, making Squidward pour ink into Patrick's lemonade. Yes, this is gross, especially considering it's coming out of Squidward's nose, but don't worry! It gets worse! Because SpongeBob and Patrick's second customer then drinks Squidward's snot water, instantly getting addicted to it. Look, I don't know if this is some sort of new fetish one of the writers had while working on this episode, and I get that they didn't really utilize Squidward being an octopus and therefore being able to produce ink before, but is that the best you could come up with then? Couldn't you have merged this episode with Doodle Dimension in some way so that they used the ink for writing and drawing there? Or have Squidward build up his own fountain pen empire, or I don't know, anything that doesn't involve having the citizens of Bikini Bottom drink the ink? Shoot, I just made them a slogan, didn't I? Patrick's suddenly actually interested in improving his business. Great character consistency here. Scares Squidward into making more ink with him ripping off his whole skin in front. Feels just like old season 6 times, doesn't it? The line at his lemonade stand got even bigger since, and so he gets a gigantic spider, which again is just kinda there, to scare Squidward again and again and again and again. And this goes on for roughly 3 minutes of Patrick just chasing Squidward around, finding new ways to scare him and make him lose more and more ink. This ranges from disguising as a ghost to a big pink baby with a Squidward nose and building a life-sized puppet in Squidward's likeness. I seriously can't remember the last time Patrick was portrayed as so malicious, so keen on completely destroying Squidward, so driven by the thought of squeezing even the last drop of ink out of him. And why is that? Because it's never happened! Patrick was never portrayed as being evil enough to actively try and do Squidward any real harm, let alone capable of building all the contraptions he built here. I'm not saying this in a nostalgia-driven way, or because I never want the characters to change, because I'm all for exploring some traits we haven't seen with the main cast before, especially since the newer seasons mixed up so much stuff already, but what I am against is portraying portraying a character as an entirely exaggerated for the worse version of himself without giving any explanation for it. He didn't have any motivation for building his lemonade stand. He just did it and kept on going and making Squidward completely miserable with it. Where did this come from? Is it like a Patrick Smartpants or Karate Star type of deal where he wasn't really himself all along? Or did he have some motivation beyond that, wanting to impress SpongeBob or something? Why would the normally peace-loving and actively work-avoiding Patrick suddenly be so interested in this? The episode doesn't give us any answers about this, because it just ends with Squidward realizing that this was all so that Patrick and SpongeBob could sell their lemonade, and him then trying to sell his own too, which of course doesn't work, because Squidward is not allowed to have good things. And what did he do to deserve all of this?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I tried my best to just breeze through this episode because I have a lot of things to say about it in hindsight and didn't want to waste too much time just picking it apart, because admittedly some of the visuals are kinda cool, like the haunted house Patrick comes up with, and Squidward losing ink in the shape of a faucet and such were pretty cool, and you know, I'm always trying my damnedest to find the good in every episode, but besides the visuals I have nothing but bad things to say about this episode. Heck, the visuals aren't even worth mentioning in particular, since all of season 10 and 11 has looked like this from the start, so it doesn't even stand out from the rest. What does stand out is the fact that this does not feel like a SpongeBob episode, even within a season often either praised for its new cartoony style or actively disliked because of it. It rather feels like a distant cousin of the show, that just so happens to include characters that look and sound eerily similar to those from SpongeBob, but share none of the same traits, and are only there to distract from the fact that had this been the concept of, say, an Augie and the Cockroaches episode, nobody would have looked and said, hey, this sounds like something you'd see on SpongeBob. Aside from all the gross out stuff, that really makes it seem like this episode was a leftover from, let's call it the dark era of seasons 6 through 8, because you saw the visuals, you can tell what it was like for me that despises stuff like this having to sit through this multiple times. Let's break down what actually happened in this episode. We have Patrick open up shop, realizing he can make money off of Squidward, milking it out of him, Squidward realizing it, and then not having success with it. Now are you willing to tell me that this could have not easily been turned into a short instead? Just cut out the 4th, 5th and 6th time of Squidward pouring ink out, and heck, that whole ending scene for that matter. Oh, what ending scene you're asking? Well, remember the spider that was just sort of there before? Well, guess what? They used the spider eggs to make cookies out of them and fed them to Squidward. This is an open letter to Peter now. Guys, if you want to get rid of an episode or anything, stir up some more drama, here you go. I just did the work for you. The eggs then admittedly hatch out and crawl out of Squidward's mouth again. But does this really sound like it makes it better? Because last time I checked, spiders crawling out of a character's mouth did not sound like a funny note to end an episode on. My god, what happened here? I don't know if this was supposed to be a Halloween episode initially, if they had to cut out some parts due to time constraints and then try to sort of stitch it together, or if someone on the staff is just really into keeping the balance in the SpongeBob world, because this episode together with My Leg makes for the most extreme pairing of good and bad I can recall in all of SpongeBob. I feel like this one wouldn't have even been that bad had it aired in the aforementioned dark era. It would have still been bad, don't get me wrong, but at least it wouldn't have stuck out as much as it does now. Because when you have episodes like My Leg, Moving Bubble Bath, Squid Noir, Spin the Bottle, Legend of Bikini Bottom, High Sea Diving and more, and then follow it up with this, it not only sticks out as an unusually bad episode of the season, but makes me as a viewer fear what's to come. If they are going to descend into the direction of putting nonsensical visuals at the forefront instead of using them as an aid to emphasize on the plot of the episode, then they just further prove critics' points of the new episodes just being lazy. A good looking show does not equal a good show, and I thought that SpongeBob had figured this out a while ago, because if we look at seasons 5 through 7, you can tell that some of the episodes have suffered a serious downgrade in terms of animation, and yet, despite there being some sore thumbs, Haha, still had some good episodes sprinkled in between. You can improve the show's quality by improving the animation, but only when it doesn't turn into the forefront of attention. And in my opinion, if you take away all the fancy stuff they added to spice up this one, there isn't anything left of merit here. It is easily the worst episode of the season, but is it really the lowest point in the entire show? Well, that depends on which way you are looking at it. Because while I find episodes like The Splinter, Fungus Among Us, and a bunch of stuff from season 7 to be very subpar, they all at least had the benefit of them being somewhat reasonably funny, in the sense that while I didn't find the gags in The Splinter to be the best in the world, I could see why someone may find enjoyment in them, whereas this episode just seems tired. It seems to not find its own premise to be very good itself, and therefore punches every little gag it has into the ground by repeating it over and over just to stretch out the runtime and find some way to keep the viewer's attention, and I find that very despicable, to be frank. To quote my buddy Sandals Fish here, there's significantly less dialogue here than in an average episode. And I'm not just complaining that there is no dialogue humor, but the dialogue is way too simple here as well. It's like this episode exists to cater to children. And speaking of catering to children, most of this episode is just loud noises. I swear 70% of all the dialogue exchanges in this episode contain screaming and shouting in it, and it's just so grating. In fact, it's so grating that I can easily call this the most annoying episode in the entire show. You can read through the rest of his little rant if you want to. I've included the link to the thread in the description. He sums up why it, in my mind, is the worst episode in the show perfectly. Because it is the culmination of everything people hate about SpongeBob without anything they love about it. It may try its best to look and sound like it, but this is not an episode. This is a joke. I respect your opinion if you think that other episodes are even worse than this one. I get it, they are established examples of why the show was at the state it was at for years, but if there's one thing this episode has taught me, is that we can never know for sure when the next Ink Lemonade is just around the corner. Thanks for watching, everyone. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some not watching or thinking about this episode to do. Take care!